if I told you that in the United States today, a single mom is evicted every 2 minutes? Sometimes not because she did anything wrong, but simply because she got sick, missed one paycheck, or dared to survive. And what if one of those mothers, pushed to the edge of homelessness, suddenly inherited an old house from a relative she never even knew existed, only to uncover a secret worth more than $150 million buried beneath its rotten floorboards? But here's the twist. That treasure wasn't a blessing at all. It was the spark that pulled her into a 40-year web of crime, corruption, and a truth so dark it could topple powerful men. Today, you're not just watching a story. You're stepping into the kind of journey that makes us ask, what would I do if life handed me a miracle wrapped in danger? This is the untold story of a mother who had nothing left to lose and found something worth fighting the world for. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Now, let's dive in. Lena Carter used to believe that if you worked hard enough, America would meet you halfway. But on a gray Tuesday morning, standing in front of her apartment door with a crumpled eviction notice in her shaking hands, she learned the truth that millions of American families discover every year. Sometimes life doesn't just knock you down, it kicks you out. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and broken hopes, and while Lena struggled to breathe, her 7-year-old daughter Mia sat on the floor beside a pile of unpacked grocery bags, humming to herself, completely unaware that in just 72 hours they would have nowhere to sleep. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Lena worked 2 jobs, late-night cleaning shifts at a medical office and weekend cashier hours at a dollar store, and still fell behind the moment Mia got sick and an ER bill worth 3 months of rent landed in her mailbox. Almost half of all American bankruptcies come from medical debt, but statistics never hit as hard as that moment when a landlord who didn't bother learning your daughter's name tells you your keys won't work by Friday. What broke Lena wasn't the notice itself. It was the look she imagined on Mia's face when she realized her home, her drawings on the fridge, her tiny bed, the purple curtains she loved, would be gone. And yet, if you asked Lena what hurt most, she'd tell you it was the feeling that she had done everything right and still failed. That's a quiet heartbreak many Americans carry. Doing your best and discovering your best is never enough for the system you're trapped in. But even in that moment, while Lena leaned against the peeling wall, fighting tears she didn't have time to shed, life didn't pause for her grief. The phone buzzed in her pocket. Another bill collector, she thought, and she almost let it ring. Almost. Because that one call from a quiet, unfamiliar voice would lead her into a world she couldn't yet imagine. A world where the cruelty of her eviction would be only the prologue to something far more dangerous, far more extraordinary. It's strange how sometimes the worst days crack open the doorway to the most unbelievable chapters. And for Lena Carter, a mother who thought she was out of luck, out of money, and out of time, this was the day the story truly began. Now, let's move into the moment that changes everything, the call that hands her a lifeline wrapped in mystery. The phone call that changed everything didn't come with trumpets or miracles. It came with a tremble of Lena's cheap prepaid phone and a number she didn't recognize. Exactly the kind of call she usually avoided, because nothing good ever came from unknown callers when you were broke. But something in her, maybe the thin thread of hope that refuses to die, even in exhausted people, made her swipe to answer. "Miss Carter?" The voice on the line was calm, old, and strangely formal. The kind of voice you hear from men who still iron their shirts and keep their promises. His name was Arthur Mills, an estate attorney who spoke like every word had been practiced. He told Lena she had been named in a will, the will of a woman named Evelyn Drake, a distant relative she couldn't remember, maybe had never met. It sounded impossible. It sounded like a scam. It sounded like the kind of thing that happened to people who didn't buy generic cereal and pray their car would start on cold mornings. But Arthur wasn't selling anything. He simply asked if Lena could come to his office to discuss the inheritance. The word inheritance hit her so hard she had to sit down. Most Americans never inherit anything. Not homes, not money, not land. Nearly 70% of people live paycheck to paycheck, and for women like Lena, with no family left, the idea of receiving anything other than bills felt unreal. When she arrived at Arthur's office the next day, tucked between a shuttered pharmacy and a tax service that looked permanently closed, she felt like she had stepped into a time capsule. The building smelled of dust and dry paper, like the world had moved on, but this place hadn't noticed. Arthur himself was polite, gentle even, sliding a manila folder across the table with the caution of someone handing over something fragile. Inside was a single-page document stating that Lena had been left a piece of property in a quiet town called Ironwood Falls, a house owned by Evelyn Drake, who had lived there alone until she passed. No fortune, no trust fund, just a house. A house so old, Arthur warned, that it hadn't been occupied in more than 15 years. A house some potential buyers walked into and walked right back out of. And yet, to Lena, sleeping in her car in a week was her other option. So, she signed. She didn't sign because she believed in fate or because she felt chosen. She signed because desperate people don't get to be picky about miracles. They take whatever lifeline appears, even the strange ones wrapped in dust and mystery. As she folded the documents and slipped them into her worn handbag, a quiet idea settled in her chest. Maybe this wasn't just a house. Maybe this was the thin, fraying bridge between losing everything and giving Mia a chance at something better. She didn't know that this house held stories darker than she could imagine. She didn't know that the woman who left it to her had secrets that stretched across decades and continents. All she knew was that they had somewhere to go. Somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't the backseat of their car. And so, with Mia buckled into the passenger seat and the sun dipping low behind the hills, Lena Carter started the engine and drove toward Ironwood Falls, toward a house abandoned by time, and a past waiting to rise from the floorboards. And that brings us to the place where destiny and danger first meet, the home she never asked for, but would change everything. Let's step inside. Ironwood Falls wasn't a place you stumbled into. It was a place you ended up when everything else in life had already said no. As Lena drove past the faded town sign, rusted, leaning, half swallowed by weeds, she felt the strange silence of a community that had been forgotten by time. Old mill towns across America had the same look: shuttered factories like metal skeletons, empty parking lots, broken windows patched with cardboard, storefronts that hadn't seen customers since the early 2000s. It was the kind of place where people didn't leave because they dreamed big. They stayed because they had nowhere else to go. When the GPS finally announced, "You have arrived," Lena stopped the car in front of a house that looked less like an inheritance and more like a warning. The wooden siding had peeled so long ago it curled like burned paper. Half the porch sagged like it was exhausted from holding itself up. The windows were clouded with grime, thick enough to hide whatever watched from the other side. Even the air felt heavy, like the house itself exhaled secrets. Mia stared wide-eyed through the window. "Is this really it, Mama?" she whispered, and Lena tried to smile, tried to sound brave, even though her chest tightened with the same mix of dread and guilt so many parents feel when they're forced to pretend that hardship is an adventure. Inside, the smell hit first, a sour mixture of mold, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old rain trapped in the walls. Wallpaper hung in shredded curls. The hardwood floors bowed like they were grieving. A broken chandelier still clung to the ceiling, twisted and missing half its glass, as if frozen in the moment it gave up. A place this neglected didn't just happen by chance. It happened because someone walked away and never looked back. And in small towns, when people leave a house behind that long, there are always stories, stories whispered in grocery aisles and on front porches late at night. Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly neighbor with eyes too kind for a place so bleak, approached cautiously, clutching a casserole covered in foil. She warned Lena softly, almost apologetically. "People say that house isn't right. Folks tried fixing it up before. They never stayed long. Not a ghost story, not a curse, just the kind of unease that grows when too many bad memories collect in one place." And while Lena didn't believe in curses, she believed in survival. She believed in trusting the knot in her stomach, the one screaming that she shouldn't let Mia spend even one night inside those walls. So that first night, they slept in the car, bundled under blankets, the engine off to save gas, their breath fogging the windows as the house loomed silently in the dark like it was waiting. But fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes fear is a flashlight. It shows you every crack, every shadow, every truth you'd rather avoid but need to face. For Lena, that night in the car was the moment she realized this house could be salvation or ruin, but she had no choice except to confront whatever waited inside. And so, at sunrise, with determination stronger than exhaustion, she stepped through the doorway again, not knowing that beneath those warped floorboards, something far more valuable and far more dangerous lay hidden, waiting for the one person desperate enough to find it. And that brings us to the discovery that would turn her world upside down, the secret buried under the floor. Let's uncover it. The discovery didn't begin with magic or fate. It began with a stubborn patch of carpet that refused to lift, the kind that smelled like mildew and old rain, the kind you'd expect in a house forgotten by everyone except time. Lena had spent the entire morning trying to scrub one tiny bedroom clean enough for Mia to sleep in, her back aching and her hands raw, when a strange hollow thud echoed under her feet. Not the solid thump of old wood. This was sharper, emptier, like the floor was hiding something. She knelt down, ran her fingers along the edges, and noticed one board that didn't quite match the others. It was newer, less warped, as if someone had replaced it in a hurry long ago. For a moment, she hesitated, because in houses like this, secrets usually meant problems, not blessings. But desperation has a way of pushing fear aside. With a crowbar she found in the basement, she pried up the loose board. It came free too easily. And beneath it, in a shallow compartment, no bigger than a suitcase, something flickered, quietly, beautifully, impossibly. At first, she thought they were broken glass. But as sunlight streamed through the dirty window and struck the objects below, the entire room lit up in scattered flecks of rainbow. Dozens, no, hundreds, of glittering stones, piled like stars in a forgotten sky. Cut diamonds, rough diamonds, pink, white, champagne, some the size of grapes. Lena froze. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a long, trembling moment, she forgot how to breathe. People like her didn't find treasure. People like her found overdue notices and bounced paychecks. Yet here she was, staring at what looked like a fortune that could erase every wound life had carved into her. She lifted one stone between her fingers, and it was so cold it made her shiver. A quick search on her cracked phone told her what her heart already knew. Even a single stone could be worth more than her annual income. And this wasn't one stone. This was wealth big enough to rewrite destiny. But the American dream has a cruel sense of humor. It often shows up dressed as a blessing, but carries the weight of something darker. Somewhere in the part of her that had learned to expect the worst, Lena felt a chill. Because you don't hide a treasure like this unless someone wants it hidden. You don't bury diamonds unless they're the kind that can destroy you if the wrong people know you have them. Still, for a moment, a small, fragile moment, Lena allowed herself to imagine a different life. A reliable car, a safe home, Mia wearing clothes that weren't hand-me-downs from the donation bin. Maybe even a future that didn't involve doing mental math in grocery aisles. But dreams built on fear rarely last. And as she carefully returned the diamonds to their hiding place, heart pounding in her chest, she suddenly felt as if the walls around her were listening, as if the house itself knew she had awakened something meant to stay buried. Because this wasn't luck, it wasn't fate. It was a doorway, one that opened into a world of danger, secrets, and power far beyond anything she had ever known. And she wasn't the only one who knew something was hidden in that house. Footsteps would soon follow. Eyes were already watching. The discovery under the floorboards wasn't just the turning point of Lena's life. It was the spark that would bring a storm to her doorstep. And that storm begins to form in the next chapter, when the shadows around Ironwood Falls start closing in. Let's step into that gathering darkness. Trouble didn't knock politely. It arrived in a black sedan with tinted windows, the kind of car that didn't belong in a dying town like Ironwood Falls. Lena saw it pull into the driveway late one morning, its engine too smooth, too quiet, like a predator breathing. Two men stepped out. Their suits were sharp, their expressions sharper, and everything about them said they were used to people listening when they spoke. The taller one introduced himself as Adrian Voss, a name spoken softly in certain corners of the East Coast. A man with connections in circles where justice rarely reaches. He smiled the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. "We represent certain interests," he said, scanning the house like it belonged to him. "And we believe you may have stumbled upon property that does not legally or ethically belong to you." He didn't say diamonds, but Lena felt the air between them tighten, as if the word itself was a switch waiting to be flipped. The way he mentioned Mia, just a casual remark about her age, her school, sent a cold, invisible knife straight into Lena's spine. Men like Adrian didn't threaten. They simply made it clear what they could take. But organized crime wasn't the only storm approaching. Within days, a reporter from a regional station showed up, claiming she'd heard rumors about a single mother inheriting a mysterious house. Small towns talk fast, especially when they have nothing else to talk about. And once one camera appeared, others followed. Vans, microphones, drones hovering above the sagging roof. Headlines bloomed online. Is Ironwood Falls sitting on hidden wealth? Abandoned house inheritance. Sparks mystery. Reporters who'd never cared about Lena's life suddenly cared about her closets, her windows, her grocery bags. And while they camped outside like hungry hawks, an entirely different crowd started arriving. Distant cousins she'd never met, people waving photocopied documents, claiming to be Evelyn Drake's children, stepchildren, fiancés, spiritual heirs, business partners, everyone wanting a slice of something they didn't earn. One woman cried on Lena's porch for 20 minutes, insisting Evelyn had promised her everything spiritually. Even a man in a faded suit claimed that Evelyn had signed over the house as collateral for a loan in 1989. The desperation was almost comical, until it wasn't, until someone tried to break in at night, rattling windows and breathing through the cracks like an animal sniffing for food. And through all of this, Lena learned a truth that hits hard when you're already vulnerable. When people think you have something valuable, they stop seeing you as human. They see you as a prize, a gate, a problem, an opportunity. The very same neighbors who once waved politely began watching her with suspicion, their curiosity sharpening into envy. Rumors spread faster than facts. She was hiding money. She was lying. She was dangerous. She was lucky. In America, luck can sometimes attract more violence than misfortune. Yet, beneath all that fear, Lena began to feel something else growing. A sense that whatever she had found wasn't just a pile of glittering stones. It was connected to something much larger, something the world had forgotten or intentionally buried. And the more the shadows pressed in, the more she needed answers. Because if Adrian Voss and his people were willing to cross state lines to intimidate a struggling single mother, then the truth behind those diamonds had to be deeper and darker than she imagined. That need for answers would lead her into the most painful part of this journey, uncovering the past of the woman who left her the house and the chilling truth about what those diamonds really were. And that is where we go next, into the history Evelyn Drake tried to hide, and the secret she needed Lena to find. Let's open that door. The truth didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived in a brown envelope slipped under the front door, the kind that looks harmless until you open it and realize your entire understanding of the world is about to crack. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn soft with age, its pages yellowed and fragile, and a short note written in shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, I can only hope you're braver than I was. It was signed simply Evelyn Drake. Lena sat at the kitchen table long after Mia fell asleep, the house creaking and groaning around her like it was remembering things it wished it could forget. And as she opened the journal, the past poured out, not in the voice of a criminal, but in the voice of a woman who had spent decades drowning in guilt. Evelyn wrote about her younger years as a jewelry broker, traveling between New York, Europe, and supply chains that glittered on the surface but rotted underneath. She described elegant showrooms filled with diamonds, stones that sparkled like stars but carried shadows no one wanted to see. And then the truth she stumbled into, slowly, painfully, that many of the diamonds passing through her hands weren't just luxury goods, they were blood diamonds, pulled from mines in war-torn regions where children worked underground until their lungs collapsed, where men were shot for resting, where villages burned so that wealthy people thousands of miles away could wear something beautiful. Evelyn wrote about the day she held a stone so perfect it almost didn't seem human-made, and then learned that 3 boys had died extracting it. Once you know, she wrote, you cannot unknow. She brought her concerns to her superiors. They told her to stay quiet. She threatened to go public. They told her she'd disappear. The journal shifted page by page, from outrage to fear. Evelyn described being followed, receiving phone calls with no voice on the other end, seeing a man in a dark coat standing outside her apartment, night after night. She wrote about the wealthy families who financed the trade, the politicians who looked the other way, the criminals who ensured no whistleblower ever lived long enough to testify. And then, the heist. Not a glamorous Hollywood-style thrill, but a desperate act by a woman who realized she couldn't save the world, but she could at least keep the worst diamonds out of circulation. She stole only the stones tied directly to child labor, murder, and war crimes, stones that were supposed to be laundered through legitimate markets before being sold to people who'd never know the cost behind their shine. Evelyn hid them, not to profit, but to prevent something monstrous from continuing. I didn't know where to go, she wrote. So I ran to the one place no one cared about anymore. Ironwood Falls, a forgotten town for a forgotten woman. By the time Lena reached the last page, her hands were trembling. The diamonds under her floor weren't treasure. They were evidence. They were screams in crystal form. They were the reason Evelyn had lived like a ghost, the reason men like Adrian Voss were suddenly circling Lena like vultures. And sitting there at that small kitchen table, Lena understood something that cut through the fear and confusion. She wasn't caught in a mystery. She was caught in the center of an inherited war. She had stepped into a fight Evelyn had been too terrified to finish. And yet, something inside Lena, some stubborn, unbreakable part of her that had survived eviction notices, hospital bills, and every insult life had thrown at her, began to rise. She realized that hiding wouldn't save Mia. Running wouldn't save anyone. The only way out of this was through the truth. And the first step toward that truth was choosing whether she would fight alone or stand with the people who were quietly beginning to gather around her. And that choice leads us into the next chapter. The unexpected army forming at her side, and the courage it takes for a broken town to rise again. Let's step into that turning point. Strength doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the shape of a neighbor holding a flashlight, or a stranger knocking on your door with a plate of food because they heard the fear trembling in your voice. For Lena, strength arrived in pieces, broken, imperfect, human pieces, on a cold evening when Mrs. Alvarez showed up again, this time not with casserole, but with a look that said she wasn't going to let Lena face this alone. Word had spread through Ironwood Falls, not just the gossip about hidden diamonds, but the truth of something deeper. A mother pushed to the edge, trying to protect her child from forces far bigger than herself. And when people who've known hardship recognize it in someone else, something powerful happens. Pastor Aaron Cole rallied volunteers from his small church, bringing blankets, motion lights, and a list of phone numbers for anyone willing to take shifts watching the house. The diner owner sent hot meals every night. A retired steelworker installed extra locks on the doors. Even the teenagers, kids who usually hung out behind the gas station, stood guard on their skateboards, pretending they were just out late, when in reality they were keeping watch for Lena. But the real shift happened when Jade Rivers, a former Army security specialist with haunted eyes and a calm voice, stepped into the living room. She reached out a hand and said, "I hear you got a problem. I fix problems." She didn't smile, didn't brag, didn't ask for money. She simply began walking through the house, pointing out vulnerabilities with the precision of someone who had once kept soldiers alive. She set up cameras, reinforced windows, taught Lena how to assess threats and stay aware. It was the first time in weeks Lena felt something unfamiliar. Control, not safety, but the beginning of it. And while Jade worked on the physical defenses, attorney Claire Bennett began building a legal shield, filing motions, documenting every threat, and preparing for the inevitable courtroom war with the people who believed they owned the diamonds. Claire explained gently but firmly that justice and safety do not always move in the same direction. Sometimes standing up for what is right means painting a target on your own back. Lena listened, her heart torn between fear for Mia and the undeniable truth she'd learned from Evelyn's journal. Silence only protects the powerful. These weren't superheroes. They were regular people, tired, overworked, running on coffee and conviction. But in a town that had been crushed by the collapse of the steel industry, a place where folks had learned to survive together or not at all, something old and stubborn sparked to life. Ironwood Falls wasn't just helping Lena. They were reclaiming a sense of purpose they hadn't felt in years. For the first time, Lena realized she didn't have to carry the fight alone. And yet, standing in the center of all that support, she knew the hardest decision still lay ahead, whether to keep the diamonds hidden and protect her daughter at all costs, or step into the fire and expose the truth Evelyn had died with. The storm was gathering over her roof, and every choice came with consequences that could change not just her life, but the lives of everyone depending on her. And that brings us to the moment when fear meets conviction, when Lena must decide what to do with the truth in her hands and what kind of future she is willing to fight for. In the next part, that decision becomes the turning point that transforms a desperate mother into a force neither crime nor corruption can ignore. Let's step into that choice. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like a mother whispering to herself in the dark, "This has to mean something." Lena stayed up the entire night at her kitchen table, the journal open beside her, the diamonds wrapped in a towel near her elbow, watching the shadows on the walls shift with each passing hour. Every option haunted her. She could disappear, take Mia to another state, sell a handful of diamonds quietly, and build a quiet, comfortable life. No one would blame her. Some might even envy her. But every time she pictured that life, she also pictured children mining in darkness, Evelyn hiding in fear, and the cold, dead look in Adrian Voss's eyes, eyes that belonged to a world where silence was currency and human suffering was collateral. "If I stay silent," Lena murmured, "I become part of it." And in that moment, she realized something simple but life-changing. Survival was no longer enough. She wanted to live in a way Mia could be proud of someday. So, she made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff and trusting the wind. With Claire and Jade at her side, Lena organized a press conference at the Ironwood Falls Town Hall, hardly more than an old brick building with mismatched chairs, but it became the stage where truth would finally be heard. Cameras from across the state crowded inside, reporters jostling for a glimpse of the woman at the center of the mystery. Lena walked to the podium, her hands trembling, but her voice, when it came, was steady. She told the story of Evelyn Drake, of the children in the mines, of the diamonds soaked in blood and fear. She held up copies of the journal pages and explained that what lay beneath her floorboards wasn't wealth. It was evidence of crimes committed across continents. And then she made the announcement that silenced the room. She was turning every stone over to international human rights organizations to be used for prosecution, transparency, and reform. Whatever money eventually came from the legal sale of the recovered diamonds wouldn't belong to her. She would divide it into 3 causes: rebuilding Ironwood Falls, supporting communities affected by conflict mining, and establishing the Evelyn Drake Foundation to help single mothers escape the cycles of poverty and violence that had nearly broken her own life. It wasn't a triumphant moment. It was a vulnerable one, a declaration from someone who had lost almost everything and somehow found the strength to give away what she could have kept. But in that vulnerability, something shifted. Reporters who came looking for scandal found sincerity. Viewers across the country saw not a thief or a lucky inheritor, but a woman who chose justice over comfort. And far away, in places where corruption once hid behind silence, powerful people began to feel the pressure of exposure. Yet even as the world reacted, Lena felt an unexpected peace settle over her. For the first time, she wasn't running from anything, not landlords, not debt, not criminals, not fear. She had chosen her path, and with that choice, she had redefined what wealth meant. And while the fight ahead would be long, lawsuits, threats, investigations, the hardest part was already done. She had found her voice. She had given the truth a place to stand. And now, as Ironwood Falls began to stir with new hope, Lena was about to witness the beginning of something extraordinary. A broken town transformed, a legacy reborn, and a future she never dared imagine taking shape. That future unfolds in the next part, where time reveals just how far one act of courage can echo. Let's step into what comes after the storm. 5 years can pass quietly, or they can remake a life so completely that the person you once were feels like a distant relative. For Lena Carter, 5 years after standing at that podium with the world's cameras pointed at her, the landscape of her life and of Ironwood Falls had transformed in ways she could never have imagined during that first cold night sleeping in her car. The town that once looked abandoned now sounded alive again. the old steel mill had been converted into a workforce training center funded by the settlement money. The shuttered bookstore reopened as a bright community library, and where weeds once broke through cracked pavement, families now strolled past new murals painted by local artists. People had begun to return home, children of former steelworkers, young families priced out of big cities, small entrepreneurs looking for a place where hope felt affordable. And in the center of it all stood the Evelyn Drake Foundation, housed inside a restored brick building that used to be the post office. Its hallways were filled with laughter, child care programs, job workshops, and framed photos of the mothers whose lives had been rebuilt, women who once faced eviction, addiction, violence, or impossible choices now worked stable jobs, owned their first cars, finished degrees, or simply had a safe place to exhale for the first time in years. Every success story felt like a quiet echo of Lena's former life, a life she honored by making sure no one else had to walk through that darkness alone. Mia, now 12, had grown into a fierce, thoughtful girl, with her mother's resilience in her smile. She had started a youth environmental club focused on ethical sourcing, determined to teach her generation that beautiful things should never come from suffering. She spoke at school assemblies, wrote letters to lawmakers, and carried Evelyn Drake's journal pages in a small folder she called her Why. And Lena, though she could have chosen comfort, fame, or a quieter path, spent her days listening to women tell their stories, guiding them toward resources, and reminding them that needing help didn't make them weak. The diamonds had changed lives, yes, but not through wealth, through impact, through restoration, through the steady work of turning pain into something useful. One fall afternoon, just as golden leaves drifted across the foundation's front steps, a young woman appeared at the doorway, holding a toddler on her hip and defeat in her eyes. Her voice shook as she explained she had lost her job. Her landlord had posted a 3-day eviction notice, and she didn't know where else to go. Lena felt the ache of recognition because her own story lived inside those same words. She placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder and said, "You're safe here. We're going to figure this out together." And as she guided her inside, past the bulletin boards of success stories and the soft hum of new beginnings, Lena caught her reflection in the glass, a reflection steadier, stronger, and far more grounded than the woman who once feared losing everything. She understood now that wealth wasn't measured in diamonds, real estate, or bank accounts. Wealth was measured in people lifted, futures rewritten, and darkness replaced by light. Ironwood Falls was alive again. Mothers were no longer alone. And the legacy Evelyn left behind, once buried under rotten floorboards, had grown into something bigger, brighter, and far more valuable than any gem. As Lena walked deeper into the foundation's warm light, she knew this story wasn't about treasure lost or found. It was about the kind of future that can only exist when someone chooses courage over comfort, justice over fear, and compassion over silence. And that future, still unfolding, was the greatest riches any of them could have ever imagined. If this story moved you, subscribe for more stories of ordinary people becoming extraordinary.